All right. Welcome back to another episode of Life After AI. Um, Today we're going to talk a little bit about the GPT-4 plugins that recently got released. We'll look at an open letter that was signed by all sorts of people asking the government to limit AI growth, um, development, and then we're going to kind of analyze some podcasts both of which involve Lex, and then one with Eliezer. We officially learned how to say his name, and the other one with Samuel. So,
Cool. Yeah. So I guess we should start with the ChatGPT plugins. This was a pretty big release, and I think it kind of came by surprise to a lot of people because I think most people, what they were looking forward to most with ChatGPT was just like the development of future models. Um, and what I didn't really see many people actually um, try to predict what would happen with ChatGPT was like alternative applications or plugins or just other kinds of features that could be embedded within the app. So to kind of summarize what exactly ChatGPT plugins are, you can kind of think of them as like browser plugins, or browser extensions. It basically just allows third-party apps to be integrated within ChatGPT that gives it new capabilities. So for example, one of the main things that people have always wanted within ChatGPT was the ability for it to actually browse the internet. Right now, ChatGPT is just limited to the knowledge that it was trained on, and so you could never like the cutoff date was like mid 2021, I think. So anything beyond that point, it has no knowledge of. But now with the new browsing plugin, you could give it a link to anything recent, and it can actually load up that web page, look at everything on that web page, and then you can ask it questions about it. Or you could just ask it something very simple like, what was the score of the basketball game last night? And then it can actually just browse the web and find that for you automatically. Um, in addition to that, there are several other plugins that came out. They started with, I think, maybe 10 from various different companies that they've partnered with. So just to name a few that I find really cool, like they did two of them were Expedia and Kayak. So now you can kind of use ChatGPT to basically plan vacations, plan trips. You could ask it to find the cheapest flights to this location for this certain amount of time, and it can then automatically search all that for you and find it. And then you can ask it, okay, now book it. And it integrates with your Kayak account or whatever you have, and then it automatically books it for you. Um, Same with, they also did Instacart. So like ordering groceries and stuff, you could ask it to, find a recipe for whatever you want and then um, order all the ingredients that it needs. And then they'll be sent to your door within a couple of hours. So it's really cool to see um, what all is going to be unlocked from this. I think this is probably, it could potentially be more important than just the release of ChatGPT itself, as a ton of different companies start to like, come up with their own third party applications that can be integrated into ChatGPT. It's kind of like the moment where like the iPhone had the App Store. Um, Previously, iPhones they could call, they could text, listen to the music. That was really about it. But then with the App Store, now we have, it could do basically anything that we want it to. Um, so yeah, super exciting to see. It's still not like publicly available. So I guess they're still trying to do a lot of development and stuff, but it'll be really cool to see how that progresses. And I'd love the opportunity to get to use them here pretty soon.
yeah, you mentioned that this might be ultimately more important to some of the business side of things, but too, just in terms of like the individual users that are now probably going to use GPT technology, probably
Hmm.
just going to go through the roof. We talked about earlier that this kind of creates like a kick-ass Siri. Um,
Yeah.
and as a guy who has an iPhone and doesn't use Siri, like I would use this, especially with the Expedia thing. So this past
Yeah.
weekend we tried to book tickets to we're vacationing in Cape Cod. In, July. And, I don't know if any of you know about getting to Cape Cod, but it is a pain. And it would be nice to have it while booking those tickets and stuff. So it's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there are some interesting implications for this that I've kind of been thinking about. Like, I feel like ChatGPT could become this like all-in-one platform for pretty much anything you want to do on the internet, right? Like, eventually it's going to have the capabilities to do whatever you instruct it to do. And so what's the point of like going to Google and navigating to all these different websites and like doing everything, I guess, manually, like we're used to now, where with ChatGPT, if it's assume that it's loaded with just like thousands of plugins for tons of different capabilities, like whatever you want to accomplish, you would just simply type in and ChatGPT should theoretically have the ability to do that. So I think it's going to like just drastically change the way that we browse the web in general. I mean, it already is, but this would be to a whole other level. Like, well, I don't need to load up anything. Like if I just have ChatGPT on my phone, I can just pull up and type stuff in and it will do it automatically.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. The thing I'm thinking about right now is like Twitter. Yeah, if let's just say you want to check tweets, you like pull up Elon Musk passed like 10 tweets, and then it just does that, and you just do it straight through.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is like the beginning of ChatGPT really like honestly just like swallowing market share for tons of different startups. It seems like a majority of the basic, or not the basic, a majority of stuff that you would like to do on the internet will eventually be integrated into these AI tools such as ChatGPT. Um, and that's both like very cool, but also like, I guess, I don't want to say concerning thing, but I think there's going to be a lot of vast implications for this long term. Um, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this ends up playing out. But I think for, the near term, this unlocks like a ton of different capabilities for ChatGPT and just going to like you kind of mentioned earlier, just skyrocket their usage even further as it gets more and more useful.
Um, think about how this will impact the startups. Like, obviously, it doesn't. Like, if you're Expedia, it doesn't really push you out. It just helps you. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it'll have hurt some companies and help others, but um, what if it like just becomes everything? That's dramatic, but uh, you could just go to GPT and be like, book a trip, and it doesn't really even involve Expedia at all. Or
Well, that's, I think, a possible scenario. And also too, to think about it just from like a business standpoint, like assume that let's just continue using travel as an example. Like assume that all the different travel websites you'd want to use when booking a trip or whatever are just integrated into ChatGPT. Um, that kind of like completely negates any marketing efforts that these companies would do because at the end of the day, ChatGPT is deciding what it's going to use. Um, and well, I guess not necessarily ChatGPT, but whatever the user instructs it to do. So as of now, like if you're booking a trip or whatever, you may just use whatever you're most familiar with or whatever pops up first on a Google search because their marketing is very strong or whatever. But with this, like you would just say, I want to do this, find me the absolute cheapest option, and it's just going to do it all for you. Like there's no influence at all from these companies, you know? So I think that's
Mhm.
like a great thing for consumers, just because they like the marketing efforts from these companies aren't going to be like as prominent, I guess, as they are now. It's just
Yeah.
going to come down to, like, again, in the instance of travel, it's just going to come down to which company can provide exactly what that user is looking for, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, I wonder, so you kind of made the key distinction, like it's a third party involved in your interaction with any given website. It's
Hmm.
a browser extension. I
Hmm.
think like it would be key for these whatever websites, Expedia in this example, it would be key for them to keep it that way. That it integrates with Expedia. Expedia doesn't integrate with it, so you have to still get the Expedia's website. Like I don't know if that's possible, and I don't know if it's already. But that way, I mean, if you're a part of Expedia, then that way you still have like ad revenue and stuff too.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the way they're integrating it now, it's the opposite. Like,
Mm,
uh, if you were to instruct it to book a trip through Expedia or
yeah,
whatever, you don't have to actually navigate to the website at all. ChatGPT is just doing it all for you, like programmatically, based on whatever you instruct it. Um,
that
so I guess sorry, go ahead.
well, that's interesting. Like I wonder then why Expedia, like how they benefit.
Well, at the moment, they're benefiting because they're basically the only travel site that's on there, other than Kayak, I guess, Expedia and Kayak. And so anyone that's using ChatGPT to book trips, it's automatically getting funneled into Expedia or Kayak.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, Whereas if you were to try and do it through Google, then you have every other website that exists that Expedia and Kayak are competing for like space for, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but when that scenario comes later on where every travel company has a ChatGPT plugin, then I don't know. I guess the way it's set up now that I think about it, you can actually select which plugin you want to use. So if I'm wanting to book a trip through ChatGPT, then I would select the Kayak plugin and it does it. Um, and I think that's the way it will remain for now. But I would imagine as it gets a lot more advanced, then you aren't going to actually select any plugins at all. They're all just built into the backend. And then based on what you instruct it to do, ChatGPT will decide which plugins it actually needs to use.
Mm,
And that's where the business implications would get pretty interesting.
right. Yeah, it would, and then you would just. I think you'd have to be good at like prompting it, because otherwise, then
Yeah.
your kind of freedom as a consumer becomes limited to basically yeah, how you prompt it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
that'll be
there's an
interesting.
interesting, also, just real quick, an interesting side note that I saw that kind of relates to this. There's a website called Hugging Face, which is basically a website for like open source AI models for anyone to access and use. They actually just released their own model. It's called Hugging GPT, that is a model designed to basically decide which model it should use based on the user prompt. So there are thousands of different AI models that are on Hugging Face. And if I simply just type in a prompt of whatever I want it to do, Hugging GPT is designed to pick which model it should use to best accomplish the user prompt. Does that make sense?
That's cool.
So I feel like this is where it gets like I'm trying to think of like the implications of this as well, because really there should be no input from users at all regarding like what model they should use or like how they should interact with like different like alternatives of ChatGPT or whatever. Like it's like everything is kind of just getting encompassed into one thing, that or one service, I guess, that has access to tons of different models, tons of different third party plugins from other businesses or whatever. And basically, whatever you type in, the backend is able to, decipher all the knowledge and external resources that it has to figure out what exactly it can do. So I feel like these are kind of, I guess, in the way of like building blocks of AGI. Because you don't want to have to, the less the user actually has to instruct the AI to do, the better. Um, and so I feel like these are like some of the major steps that we're kind of taking towards AGI now.
Yeah. That on the one hand, that seems cool to me that everything will be like centralized, but on the other hand, that I think that leaves it vulnerable uh, to being centralized. So,
Yeah.
so we'll talk on it later when we talk about Sam and Lex's podcast. But that was a big like concern of Sam. Sam's was making the experience as like kind of individual friendly as possible. Um, so it, it'll just be, yeah. I wonder how he'll kind of go about that as your scenario plays out. It seems, yeah, possible, likely, or
hmm Yeah, I think like a lot of the points that some people make, it's like there isn't just going to be one AGI that kind of ends up being the thing that is used by everyone. It'll probably be a couple different AGIs, or maybe everybody has their own AGI that's tailored towards them. I mean, that's obviously the ideal scenario. Um, but yeah, I think stuff like, ChatGPT plugins and the Hugging GPT model, this is like I mentioned earlier, just kind of, I guess, some of the building blocks that are needed to get closer to AGI for us.
mm. Yeah, yeah. I hadn't really thought of it in regards to AG, so that that's cool.
So yeah,
Are
well,
there,
you want to move on to some of the Lex interviews?
yeah, we could. I was gonna see if there were any other kind of apps that were worth mentioning, or not apps, but plugins.
Let's see. So the Shop app is an interesting one. Shop is owned by Shopify. So basically, it would have access to any products or all products that are, used through Shopify stores. So I guess if there was something in particular that you were looking for and you didn't want to have to look at, 20 different Shopify stores to figure out what it is or like the right one that you would want, you could just use ChatGPT to say, I'm looking for this, find the cheapest one. And I guess when GPT-4 or when we have access to like the image model for GPT-4, you could just upload a picture of whatever you want. And then GPT would like, I want to buy this, find it for me and find the cheapest seller. And then it'll just do it.
Nice. Speak. Yeah, the math one that seems interesting, and then yeah, it would just be cool. Have you like heard their plans to expand?
No, and I've been on the wait list basically since day one, and I don't see anyone on Twitter that's like recently gotten access to plugins, so it seems extremely limited at the moment. And I haven't read anything about new apps that have came out since the launch or anything, so I guess they're trying to take this pretty slow.
I guess that seems good. In light of, well, I guess let's talk about that open letter first because it kind of ties in with everything else. So basically, I made it last week. Basically, so it's called Pause Giant AI Experiments in Open Letter, and what it is petition of sorts signed by all sorts of business leaders, um, politicians. You got Andrew Yang on there. Um, yeah, so you got like 3,000 people of those sorts signing this thing, and yeah, they're just kind of asking all AI labs to slow down on development, and they're asking the government to step in to enforce that. So, um, I think Alec and I are on the same page with this. It, I guess it has good intentions. I get why they would sign it. It seems very impractical to me. It also, I don't think the pros of slowing down outweigh the cost of slowing down. And we'll kind of talk about that, like, you know, listening to the two different podcasts. I'm kind of seeing two different schools of thought uh, come about. There's the OpenAI, Sam Altman school, where, you know, they're ready to kind of like tackle these problems and figure it out as they go. Uh, and then you've got Eliezer and kind of this crew who signed this open letter saying like, hey, let's slow down now and kind of figure out how these things work. And yeah, although I don't think Eliezer signed it. He may have. I haven't seen that. But regardless, they're kind of in the same school.
Yeah, I find the letter to be a bit silly, if I'm being honest. And I was definitely disappointed to see Elon Musk sign it, of all people. I, f- I He should know better than most people that the only way to properly progress a product is by putting it out there for people to use. And to just sit there and say we should pause for 6 months and try to predict certain scenarios that may or may not happen and how we can protect ourselves from them, it's just not a realistic thing at all. We have no idea what's going to come of AI. All that we do know is that AGI is basically inevitable. And so we have to keep treading through in the safest way that we know how. And then, see how things progress along the way and then react to them. In my mind, that's the only way to do this. Like, I don't see what pausing for 6 months is going to accomplish other than, like maybe letting other countries get way ahead of us at AGI, which is a much, much worse scenario in my mind.
Agreed. And kind of the thought I had too was like, okay, so you have this break put in place and you have AI development like carefully regulated, and I guess I would have concerns about like corruption taking place within that process. It may or may not, but I think that allows that to happen. And at the moment,
Like what specifically?
Well, okay, so who's to say like you have these third party assessors watching what these different labs are doing? What keeps the money flowing into their pocket?
Yeah.
And then they can kind of give judgments like, this lab, you got to slow down, but this lab, you're onto something. And I doubt its ability to remain impartial. And also, I just doubt its ability to like actually accurately assess these things, make good calls. Could be wrong, but it could just be my kind of bias towards big systems, government systems. But yeah, I don't think it's gonna work out. And two, like, I think last episode I mentioned, like, in my mind, the only thing you can really do in this situation is ask and try and put in place like competent, honest people. And what I saw from the Sam and Lex conversation is that we have competent, honest people kind of leading this thing who are going to work their butt off to deal with whatever comes up. So, yeah, I guess I just feel comforted with what and I think the letter is a good fit.
No, I agree 100%. And perhaps I would feel a lot different if Sam and OpenAI weren't the people leading the helm on this. But given that he and OpenAI, like, they are the people that are the most advanced in AI globally right now, I find that to be very, very comforting, because everything that I kind of gathered from their interview was that they are doing everything with good intentions in mind and to the best of their ability, and they are not ignorant to the possible scenarios of AI causing a lot of harm and destruction. They are fully aware of these. They are just as scared of them, if not more scared of them than we are as like normal consumers that are kind of on the outside of that. And I think that's exactly what we want. Like, you want these people who are pushing the envelope to actually be scared. Like, it would be more concerning if they weren't. And if they were trying to paint this picture of like, oh, AI is going to be completely positive for everybody and you have nothing to worry about. Like, that would be a much worse scenario. Um, so yeah, I don't think this open letter has any actual bearing other than just like stirring up some drama. Um, but yeah, there were some very interesting people that signed it. I mean, obviously you have Elon, Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple.
Okay, you know how we talked about some people who signed this thing maybe having ulterior motives? I feel like he definitely had ulterior motives.
Perhaps, yeah, given that Apple has no AI presence at all right now.
Mm, just a theory.
Yeah. And I know we kind of talked about this, and I don't think either of us really feel this way, but there might be a very small amount of ulterior motive for someone like Elon to sign this. Very tiny.
I wasn't going to mention.
None at all? Oh.
No, I think you might. It's possible. I wasn't going to mention that we thought that.
Oh, well, let's talk about it because we are both big Elon fans. We pretty much support the majority of what he does. But I wouldn't say there's a 0% chance that he has ulterior motives in this. Especially given the fact that Twitter is now working on their own ChatGPT competitor, their own large language model, and also the fact that OpenAI stole, or I shouldn't say stole, but OpenAI now employs one of Tesla's main AI engineers who kind of built autopilot basically from the ground up. That obviously struck a chord for Elon. He didn't respond too well to that on Twitter. And so I think there's definitely some animosity between him and Sam now at this point. And you can kind of tell that from the interview with Lex as well. Lex was not, or sorry, Sam was not a fan of the comments that Elon has been making on Twitter about OpenAI.
And, you know, whether Elon has ulterior motives, it's just, like you said, it's just,
yeah.
Basically my real gripe with Elon is just, you know, I don't think he's like going about addressing these problems in the best way possible. But, you know, as I mentioned before, just between you and I talking, like, he also done, as far as I can tell, it's very possible that every second of his day is taken up. So, and this is what he can contribute. So I guess that's all I'm going to say about that. But yeah, did you elaborate on Sam's reaction?
Not too much. The one that I personally found the most like interesting, I guess, was the analogy that Sam made to Elon's kind of viral video of Elon being interviewed about SpaceX and how a lot of the main people in the space industry were kind of saying what Elon was doing was crazy. There's no chance he's actually going to succeed, blah, blah, blah. And you could tell that in the video, I mean, Elon was basically like tearing up and crying a little bit about this because these people were like his heroes that he's always looked up to. And the analogy that Sam made was he was in that same scenario. Like, Elon is someone that he's always looked up to. And now Elon is like, not necessarily tearing down OpenAI, but like giving them a lot of backlash and criticism to the way that they've handled things. So I do wish that Elon would handle these things in a more productive way. But like you mentioned, you know, he might just not really have the time to do that at the moment. So he'll just fire out a couple tweets and that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Find some other interesting points that got brought up. That conversation between Sam and Lex we both kind of agreed it wasn't perhaps as deep as we would have liked. Like they kind of stayed on the surface level of a bunch of um, topics within AI. So, if you're looking for that sort of stuff, I don't think that's the podcast for you. But just for me, it was kind of my first time really hearing Sam talk, and um, I thought it was good to hear. You could tell he was just genuine, uh, really cared about what he was doing, and really cared about feedback. But did you get to the part you watched it already?
Mhm.
So that international tour he's doing, where he's going to go
Yeah,
drink beer with like all the users and stuff, hear their feedback, and
that's awesome.
yeah, that's the sort of stuff that I really appreciate. Like looking back on my time in the Air Force, like leaders like that. That's what you want. So, yeah.
One thing I did want to talk about a little more from that interview was their brief conversation about the decision to take OpenAI from a nonprofit to a for-profit organization and not be fully open source. Um, Actually, our first episode of this podcast, we kind of talked about the whole open source debate because that was the hot topic at the time. And my opinion has always been that it does not make sense for um, a company such as OpenAI to be fully open source with everything that they're doing. And it was not feasible for them to remain a nonprofit company because in order to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, which is build AGI, that takes like an immense amount of resources. And their discussion on this kind of confirmed that belief for me because Sam had basically mentioned that they did everything that they could as a nonprofit to try and raise the money that they needed to accomplish all of their goals, and it was just not physically possible. Um, and so I really am not a fan of like all these, like everybody on Twitter is still kind of taking shots at OpenAI and Sam for, being closed source, being a for-profit company now. Um, it's just not realistic for that to happen. And I think a lot of the detractors to that are just kind of like virtue signaling in a way. Especially now that, and a lot of people too, just to be honest, like since Elon has kind of said, like given them backlash for this, a lot of people are just hopping on that bandwagon. Like they'll just kind of go with whatever Elon's opinion is, you know? Um,
To kind of push back on that. So Twitter open source their
just like the recommendation algorithm. Yeah.
okay, okay, but that's been a fairly positive process, right?
Yeah. I think people are glad to see, what exactly, is going on behind the scenes, on the Twitter algorithm. But I think, and like, are you basically saying like that is kind of like people respond to it well, or what do you mean?
Well, I'm just saying, um, Twitter got good feedback, and the users really got to kind of pinpoint like the problems they're having with their experience, and
Sure.
it just seemed to be a good move. Uh,
Yeah, I agree, especially in the instance of Twitter, it was a great move, and I think more social media companies should do that. I
but you
just
think
think in the
GPT's a different case?
yeah, I don't think it'd be a very good idea for something like GPT-4 to be fully open source. And I think actually Eliezer kind of agrees with that too, to an extent.
Yeah,
And not necessarily just from a safety standpoint, but also just from a business standpoint. Like the amount of money that OpenAI has had to raise, I mean, upwards of 13, $14 billion, whatever it is, you're not going to do that as a open source nonprofit. It's just not going to happen unless you just happen to convince one of the 5 people in the world who have a ton of money to write you a check for, $20 million or $20 billion, which is not going to happen.
yeah. And I guess like I don't know this for sure, but OpenAI does kind of release chunks of their source to certain research labs, certain whatever. Mhm.
they're still very transparent regarding everything that they're doing. I think a lot of people just turn a blind eye to that or don't really pay attention because it's more fun to say, make fun of them and say closed AI or blah, blah, blah. Like,
Yeah.
um, and then two, a point that Sam made. Oh crap! I lost my train of thought. Um, yeah, I don't remember where I was going, but um,
That's fine. Well, this is a good spot for me to mention this. So,
mhm.
did you catch that Sam hadn't seen Ex Machina?
Oh yeah,
Isn't that absurd?
yeah, it is. Um, I forgot about that completely. I
I was
think,
blown away.
yeah, maybe he should watch it. It might be a good see what a bad scenario might look like a little bit.
Okay, so just some interesting points that I recall now that I've got through my notes. So he did mention that like GPT-4, it's mostly a database more than it is a reasoning engine. But from what I picked up was that it can reason to some extent, which I think is kind of obvious now based off the user experience. But um, it seems to have developed that on its own.
Is this your interpretation or what Sam had said?
I think it's a little bit of both,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
No,
Um,
yeah,
okay. Yeah, it seems to have developed that on its own. And what I got from both Eliezer and Sam was like, and Brett Weinstein, a separate conversation. It's like, just how these things function. Like there's a lot of it we don't know. Maybe we've mentioned that before, but that is a serious area of concern where understanding that it's like, okay, so I get why these people signed this letter to stop AI development. But, like, okay, in this 6 months, you listen to Eliezer talk 6 months, we're not going to figure out anything. What you need is 40 years. So you're going to sacrifice these 6 months for nothing. And you certainly can't sacrifice 40 years. So, whether their concerns are legit or not, to me, their point is moot because it's just
yeah,
nothing's going to come from it.
yeah, agreed.
It's something we're going to have to grapple with as we go.
Yeah, I think that's really the only path forward. Um, and to be honest, I actually today was the first time I actually pulled up the letter, and there's like less than 4,000 signatures. So, given the support it has from the big names and the amount of signatures it actually has, it's a very small number of people who actually support something like this.
Yeah, it is. I wonder. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just that that into it.
Yeah.
Did you understand much about the? Okay, so is it RLHF, the human feedback? Is that the correct acronym?
Yeah, it's reinforcement of human learning, something like that.
Okay,
RLHF, I think, is the acronym. Yeah.
wait, that would be RHL.
Hold on. Let me Google this.
So that was one topic that was like really interesting,
Oh,
but I couldn't comprehend a lot of it.
reinforcement learning from human feedback. There we go. So RLHF. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't think he went too much in the specifics of like how exactly or what exactly this looks like on the back end of OpenAI, but from what he described it, like the best way to summarize what's happening there is just you have actual people that are monitoring outputs from different prompts. So you have several different outputs from one single prompt, and then the human selects which one is best based on whatever that criteria may be, you know? Um, And I guess that is kind of a way to make it more human-like. And what I found really interesting too was that um, I think from what he was saying, and he didn't elaborate on the actual size of what GPT-4 is compared to GPT-3, but what I found really interesting was he said that RLHF was like where a majority of the improvement benefits actually come from. It's not actually feeding it more data; it's just giving it more feedback from what humans are looking for. That's actually what makes it extremely better. Um, so I found that to be really interesting because I guess like you don't need to have these ginormous models that have literally every data point on the entire internet for it to be a good model. You could have a model that can run on an iPhone or a laptop or whatever and make it extremely powerful just from RLHF over time. Um, but I, I think he maybe talked a little bit briefly about, you know, their guidelines for this, but I would like to hear a lot more about that topic in particular because having any kind of human input at all allows for some sort of like bias that you may or may not want in there. But
Oh, that's what I
it
was
seems to be
bringing up.
working for them so far. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's what I was bring up was he was concerned that could be a significant source of bias within the system. Uh,
Yeah.
and just that it would be hard to like vet the trainers and stuff to, yeah, see what they were gonna, how they were gonna impact it. Two, this topic again, it was hard to grasp, but something to do with RLHF, uh, help whole alignment problem in Sam's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it had to do something with the fact that, uh, like you said, it created a more human-like AI. And Sam saw that as a positive. It is a gross simplification of what is happening and what they were talking about. But that is, I think that is the point,
Mm-hmm.
is that is that AI that is more human-like is good. Eliezer disagreed. He did not want AI that had kind of the emotions that humans have. He saw that as a flaw. And there's a ton of stuff to unpack there. But I think I gotta agree. Well, I think I gotta agree with Sam, just because if you have AI that is human-like, we've been dealing with humans for forever. I think we stand more of a chance of like negotiating with AI and figuring it out, and creating some sort of role for ourselves that it's completely computer-like. I think, but Eliezer's main disagreement was that because um, because of the data that it's being trained on, it could be imitating human emotion. So, we could get to a certain point where we think we're interacting with an AI that is more or less like us. But what's really happening is that it's just faking that. And behind that is some emotionless robot that's going to destroy us. That seems legit. I have no idea how you go about addressing that. But if that's not the case, I think, yeah, the whole more human-like AI thing is the way to go.
Yeah. My first reaction would be I agree with Sam that more human-like would be ideal, but I guess there's a lot of like nuance in this discussion. Like, does having emotion imply that, or sorry, does not having emotion imply that it's not capable of having goals? Like, are those two things like mutually exclusive? Because I feel like an AI that does not have or is not capable of coming up with its own goals and motives, that would be a scenario where like we have a lot less to worry about of AI harming us because it's literally only going to do what we tell it to do and it does not care either way. Um, but this is like trying. This is where I've there's so many different ways you could look at this argument because we really don't even hardly understand the human brain. So like, how are we going to try and make analogies to an AGI that may or may not mimic the human brain? You know, like we really have no idea what's going on there. But I think I do agree with what you were saying as far as like, in the event of a scenario that we don't really want, if it's more human like, then we have a better chance of actually being able to reason and negotiate with these AGIs as opposed to one that's just like already, it has its own goals and it could destroy humanity in the process of trying to accomplish those goals.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is just something I've been like kind of thinking about lately. So, Lex was kind of arguing for Sam's position and saying like human emotion is a feature, not a bug. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. And I agree with him. Just, just in the big picture of things, like I think that question is more of a question like, do you have faith in humanity? Do you like humanity? Because that's what humanity is. It's kind of more emotion based, and it's just a key part of it. And anyway, as an English major, I encounter a lot of people that do not seem to like humanity.
Mhm.
So it's just something that's been bugging me. But yeah, so at the end of the day, yeah, I think I want these things to have emotion.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Um, were there any other like main takeaways you had from that interview?
Mm, let me check it. No, not really. I think that is about it.
All right. Well, unless there's any other topics that you can think of, uh, start to wrap here. Is there anything else from like the Eliezer interview as well, or you want to wrap things up here?
Yeah, yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, cool. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back in the next one.